everybody. This is Maeva Cifuentes, your host for another episode of Executive Conversations. In this podcast, I talk to go-to-market leaders about the behind the scenes of marketing, not the strategy, not the tactics, but how do you actually deal with the people to get things done, the people and the data, of course. Today, I'm really excited to speak to Rick Egan, who is the CMO at Beyond Inc. How is it going, Rick?
It's going. I think, this is a challenging year for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of uncertainty, and I think you feel that a lot on the day to day of everything that we have to deal with.
It has been a very intense year, and I'm really curious. I was just telling you before we started recording that you have a very interesting profile. Right now, you're at a public company. I've also never had anybody who is currently at a public company on the podcast, if I'm not wrong. And so your perspectives there as well is really interesting. But aside from that, you've also just had quite a diverse background in a lot of different industries. You said it yourself, you've been in D2C, B2B, lead gen, all of the things with the starting background in SEO. So quite the perspective to see how things have developed up until this year. What are you seeing?
As it pertains to this year, or just, I
I
think
think
this,
like this year, but also just the changes that have been occurring in the last 5 up until now.
yeah, that's a good point to look at the last five, because you really, I think a lot of the last, if you go back 5 years, you were just at the beginning of COVID, and everything and everything at that time, I think followed a similar playbook. As it pertained to anything digital, anything on the digital side, because digital was still, typically probably for most industries was like less than 20% of sales, and it was easier to follow kind of the same playbook. And then COVID happened, digital exploded, and became a much bigger percent of total enterprise sales. And then even direct to consumer brands became much larger than they were kind of pre-COVID. So, so many buying habits kind of shifted that way. But then you also really had, because of a lot of economic things that ended up happening, everybody kind of overbought too. So you kind of had that component as well. And so I think as we kind of came out of that, everybody, kind of was searching for the bottom, so to speak, of where do they hit that point, and then, how do they get back to normal? And in a lot of ways, I think we maybe are just kind of hitting the point where we might actually be getting back to normal, or at
Oh,
least where we come out on the other side of this will be back to normal.
really?
Um,
In what sense do you mean?
um, because what you ended up with was consumers, because they were stuck in their homes, but they were also flush with cash at the same time. So many, they just really bought lots and lots of things all over the place. And then and then even over the last few years, you kind of slowly had this, okay, we're going back to the office. Some people are not, but it's kind of normalizing back down to now where, I think 10% are remote, 90% are back in office at some level, whether that's a few days a week or, you know, in some cases even up to 5 days a week. So, so you're starting to get back to that normal period before where, you just have all your normal things in life that you had kind of pre-COVID, so pre-2020. And so, but we're still going through some of the, you know, people aren't, certain groups are not buying as much as they did pre-COVID. So that's kind of impacting what retailers have to do, because especially anybody that's publicly traded, like a Beyond, you still have shareholders that are looking for certain signals, and they want that information. So that you constantly are trying to kind of ignore maybe what the true economic cycle is, to deliver something that the street would be happy with. So
tell me more about ignoring the current economic cycle to deliver. You mean like showing data in a way, or like, what? I'm not sure I grasp.
Well, I think so. If consumers are, by nature spending less, let's say, or if you just say like, who's in market for something, who's in market for a desk, that if a lot of people already bought their desk, and like in a normal times, let's say 5% of the potential in-market shopper would be interested in buying a desk. So in COVID, maybe that shot up to 8. So you
Hmm.
could sell that many more. Well, then naturally, if it's always going to be 5, if that's your average, then the reality is you only have 2 or 3% that would actually be in market for that product now. And so that's why I say like ignoring it. So it becomes a smaller pool of people
Hmm.
essentially that are in market that everybody's fighting for, because then everybody is getting pressure and saying, we really like the sales volume during the peak of COVID. How do we get back there? Instead of saying, oh, well, we just had an abnormal spike um, for a 1 to 2 year period. So now if we look at and this is true of any business, if you look at your business over a 3 to 5 year span, your kind of average sales are going to look like average sales per year are going to look like one thing with probably, some amount of growth. So, that was kind of the outcome of COVID for many digital companies, is they had a peak, and then it was followed by a down period, which, for somebody like myself who's been in digital for, 20 years, you never saw that. Every year grew 30%, 20 to 30%, no matter what you did, because that was just really, new customer adoption of moving, you know, offline to online. And so you were always going to have that. So post COVID, you actually had the opposite, where then people went, okay, I'm going to go back to the store. And so your customer pool shrank because those people went back away from online. But then also everybody had overbought at the same time. And then you also all the, kind of all the manufacturers and everything manufactured for the peak period, kind of coming out of it. So then you have excess inventory. So you have too many things in warehouses and not enough customers. So,
Okay. So that's what
but
you're saying. It's normalizing now because now the items in the inventory are normalizing, and we're getting used to the
yeah, so it's starting to normalize, although the tariffs like threw everything for,
right.
that kind of threw everything kind of through for a loop, because then everybody just went, I want to avoid the tariffs, so let me like, go buy a huge amount of inventory again. And so
Oh,
now they're kind of stuck with, people are buying, people are not buying, but now they have too much inventory again. So that's where they have to get back to like where that, kind of equilibrium is. Because then you can have normal prices again, and then you can have better margins, which then allows you to make more investments into various things.
how is this affecting you as a marketer?
It's just a continual balance. Like you see I think as a marketer, you see the impact of it from the the need to discount, or the need or push to do discounts to incentivize sales. So you see it in that, and then you see it in, probably I would say for me, you see it in conversion rates. You see conversion rates aren't necessarily the same, because that to me is always a clear sign of demand. When the demand's higher, you're going to have a conversion rate that you would more expect. And when the demand's naturally lower, it's going to go down. So then your response, so to speak, to that lower demand and lower conversion rate is, I basically have to lower prices to try to further incentivize somebody to purchase.
Wait, so the inventory that's been overbought, I understood it as Beyond has bought a lot of inventory because Beyond is direct to consumer.
Well, so yeah, well, but we're more of a marketplace. So
Okay.
for us, we're basically other people are we're a marketplace, so we're selling on behalf of other people. So it's those people that are selling on site that have too much inventory.
Okay. And so you have that has affected your conversion rates because of the side that is selling, because of the seller side?
No, when I just say the conversion rate, it's just naturally you're just going to put a product up and, if demand is higher, let's say you're in a period of high demand, like the holidays, everybody's just going to buy. People are shopping. You're going to have much higher conversion rates naturally during peak demand times. So when demand is lower, your conversion rate's naturally going to be lower because effectively the people that are buying are buying more based on need than want. So, and if there's fewer people, that have a need, then then you're just naturally going to have lower conversions. So,
When you're having these conversations at an executive level, then where demand is lower, that's an obvious thing, but I imagine your expectations, like what you're supposed to deliver, have not dropped, or maybe they have, I don't know, but like, what's the conversations that you're having there?
oh no, nobody wants to listen to that one. That's just considered an excuse. So. That's where then you have to you're pushing more of the narratives of of okay, what's promos can we run and what discounts, and you're probably having pricing conversations and things like that because yeah, nobody really ever wants to hear you say, oh, there's just less demand right now. People know it, and you do, and you will talk about it and say, oh, demand isn't as high right now, but then that just leads to, well, we still need to make the sales we need to make. So, because, and that's true whether you're publicly traded or not publicly traded, because everybody's basically doing a budget, and and then they're staffing and planning around what their expected sales are going to be. So if you're not making your sales numbers, then then you invariably then have to do things that you don't want to do, which is typically cut people, cut vendors, other things to reduce cost.
Yeah. How it's very intense time specifically right now in 2025. You're the first person actually that I've had on bringing up tariffs, which makes sense because of the industry that you're in. I've spoken to a lot of SaaS people,
Yeah.
which I don't think are very affected by it at the moment. At least the conversation that I've been having, it hasn't brought up. So I'm interested in hearing, yeah, your
Yeah.
perspective on how 2025 overall has been for you.
Well, I think that the SaaS people, depending what they're in, it will affect them.
Mm,
Um, because depending what space you're in, especially, but if you're a SaaS provider into retail,
yeah,
the tariffs are for sure going to affect you. And, and a lot of things will because it's naturally gonna, tariffs are basically, yeah, I mean, it's basically increasing cost of, kind of a product. So it's an inflationary pressure that's gonna, kind of flow down to everybody. It's just who does it hit first? So if you're a so retail's probably where it's typically going to hit people first, because if you're buying a product that's being imported, then then there's additional costs being just added to it through effectively a tax, which increases the cost of the product. And so then you're going to pass some or all of that cost onto the consumer, which then means all products cost more, which is basically inflationary. And so then if consumers to purchase the same thing have less money, then that's eventually has to flow back to employers ultimately have to pay more because it costs more to your cost of living goes up. You have less disposable income to go out and use on services or things like that. So it will have a ripple effect through that ultimately hits, everybody. It's just, how and when. Who's at the tip of the spear and who's at the back of the line.
Now, okay, I want to look at your career, and specifically, not specifically your career, but you just have like an interesting background, and I want to look at how you think the role of marketing has changed over the years. Although you have, I mean, obviously your role has changed as well. Your job title has changed, but in general, do you think that marketers are asked to or expected to be doing something different now in general, or marketing as a concept?
Ah, I think so. I mean, I don't know, just kind of over my career, I think one of the big things that's changed for marketers is the role technology plays in marketing. I think, the basic concept of marketing of, identifying kind of, what's the value of the product or service that you're selling? How do you position yourself in the market? What is your, what is your product fit? And, who's the customer ultimately of that product fit? And, all those things are more or less the same. But I think the big thing that's, has changed and is going to change even more is the technology side, because marketers had, kind of, I think a lot of when I think like earlier in my career, you still really, while technology played a part in marketing, it wasn't as easy to use or easy to operate by the marketers. So there were things that, so I think like email programs, when I think back like 15 years ago, a lot of times like the email operators tended to have like real tech backgrounds because you really needed to understand, you had to do a lot of the technology, through coding and things like that. Now it's much more simplified. So, a non-technical person or somebody with low technical skills, can operate all these things. And then marketing, to be able to deliver things at scale has to use technology. So as a marketing leader, I think it's become more and more important that you not have to be a marketer, but you in some ways have to be a technologist at the same time, which is, you know, which is different from, 20 years ago, where probably if you were a great brand creative strategist, with no without much technology or even much kind of financial acumen on the kind of performance marketing side, you can easily lead marketing and run with the whole thing and stuff like that. And that's one thing that's changed a lot, that that a lot of the marketing leaders come more from performance and kind of technology backgrounds, because I think that's become so much more important than it used to be. So that's such a big part of it. And then that's, I think, going to be, with AI, that will be even more important.
Yeah.
So, because AI is just really, that'll be kind of the next wave over the next 3 to 5 years, will be the, AI workflows and AI automations and things like that will, where it used to take 10 people to do something, it's going to take two or three. So, and then the people who can master using the technology or that type of technology will be the ones that, kind of flourish within that. And the ones that fight it or don't want to do it will be the ones that get left behind.
You mentioned earlier in our chat, and I can't remember if we were recording or not, but you come from a background in SEO, and you were saying as you become more of an executive, your role is you'll always be deep in one skill and then more of a generalist in all the other ones, and you hire the people who are experts in the space. And so when it comes to this topic of the marketer is having to become more technically proficient, more financially proficient, and know all of these things. Do you find that the like today's marketing leader, they need to also build those skills, or they need to hire people who have those skills? Or do you get the question?
I think so. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, it probably just depends on the person. I mean, the best leaders probably understand what they're not good at, and they hire good people at the things that they know they're not good at, and then they let those people, they give those people the autonomy and freedom to kind of own the areas that they're experts in and get out of their way. So, so I think that's, like all good leaders really are good at that. The micromanagers struggle a bit more, I think, a lot of times because I mean, they can have a lot of success too, but then people have a harder time working for them. And, ultimately is you need to innovate. Probably the micromanager, it's hard for them to be really good at everything. And if they can't let go of that control, then eventually that's probably going to be a negative for them at some point.
Mm, right. So you're saying those ones would say, I have to be able to learn this skill myself.
Yeah, yeah, you have to be able to learn this skill yourself, whereas really what you probably really need to do, so, I think AI would be a great example of that. I think really what you have to, be able to do as a leader is not necessarily say, okay, I'm gonna go be the example and I'm gonna go figure out how to do all this stuff. You have to say, this is important and I have to find ways to encourage people on the team to go out and use it and start doing things, and then kind of start to build the reward systems around those types of the people that are excelling at those types of things, so that you know and then that will increase the adoption, and other people will start to do it, and then those that are really unwilling become the people that you probably start to manage out.
Yeah. Do you kind of expect the team members to just say, "Hey, I'd like you to figure this out," and they kind of figure it out and learn on their own? Or are you providing
Oh
the
no, I totally find that this is some like AI especially because I think most people are afraid of it.
mm,
Because it's like a factory job that there used to be an assembly line and somebody screwed a certain bolt on, and they had a job for life and a nice pension and all good. And so now you're telling somebody that writes content for a living to start using, you know, AI or start using ChatGPT to, create content because that they can create more content at scale at doing that. And it's not that that person is no longer valuable. It's just that copy or that editor or that copywriter could only do so much work on their own.
mm,
And their ideas, and that their ideas over time probably start to become a lot of the same thing, because they only have their experience. And once you're doing one thing, you're going to tend to do the same thing or similar thing over and over again. So using ChatGPT, you can create content at much greater scale, which has advantages. And then you also have the advantage of you can be a lot more creative because you can just start with the seed ideas and build from there and continue to learn, as opposed to if you have to start everything from scratch, you have to ideate, you have to research, you have to do so much work just to be able to produce one thing.
how are you finding like is your team excited about it? A bit of a
No, I still continue to find resistance. I think people are warming to it, but there's still a lot of resistance getting people, because it's like I said, it's people fear the unknown, and then they fear that maybe in that But in that earlier piece, if you had the if you had the super micromanager who had to do everything first, then you might go, oh, eventually, this team of 20, is only going to be a team of one because that person's going to find out that they can just, through prompts, do everybody's job, which which is untrue, but I think sometimes it feels like that's the fear that people have. So they tend to want to hold on to what they're doing today.
Mm.
So
This is like a good place to wrap it up, Rick. This has been a really great conversation. I really appreciate all of your insights that you shared with me.
I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. And for those who listened, please do reach out to Rick on LinkedIn, say hello, give us a like, and let us know if you've watched this episode until the end. It would mean a lot. And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.